Welcome to 21st Sports Recap and Reaction for the Seattle Seahawks with the Minnesota Vikings in their Week 13 matchup played December 6, 2015. We're going to go over every possession and the stats and give our breakdown and analysis. And this game was all Seattle. They just dominated this game. Even on their first possession, they actually fumbled the ball after 4 plays. And Minnesota would take over on their own 30 after the fumble, but they went 3 and out as Frank Clark came up with a big sack on 3rd down. And then after the punt, Seattle would take over on their own 19, and Russell Wilson would drive them 81 yards in 12 plays, eating up over 7.5 minutes of game clock. And they ended up with a touchdown, a 5-yard touchdown run by Thomas Rawls. And that was with about 3.5 minutes still left in the first. And with the extra point by Hauschka, it was 7-0 Seahawks over the Vikings. So the Seattle defense continued to dominate as they forced Minnesota to punt after 5 plays. The Seahawks would punt on their next possession after 4 plays. As we were now into the second quarters, the Seahawks brought the first quarter to a close and punted early in the second. And now the Vikings would once again punt after 8 plays this time. And so now Seattle would get the ball after the punt backed up against their own end zone on their own 2-yard line. But they were able to make some magic happen. Russell Wilson drove them 98 yards on this drive in 13 plays in just over 6 minutes, including a big play on 3rd and 8 from the Seattle 43. When Russell Wilson hit Tyler Lockett for a 29-yard reception, and then an unnecessary roughness call added another 14 yards that put them on the Minnesota 14 in the red zone. Wilson was sacked on the first play right there in the red zone by Robeson, but an unnecessary roughness call made it a first down on the 11, and then on 3rd down, 3rd and 7 from the 8, Russell Wilson takes it in himself an 8-yard touchdown run just before the 2-minute warning. And with the extra point by Hauschka, it was 14-0 Seahawks over the Vikings. So now Minnesota would get it before the 2-minute warning. They would bring the game to the 2-minute warning actually on the kickoff. And so then after picking up a first down, they were then faced with a 2nd and 4 on their own 33. Bridgewater dropped back and he was intercepted by Earl Thomas. Earl Thomas would set up the offense on the Minnesota 20 right there on the edge of the red zone. And Russell Wilson went to Doug Baldwin for a 20-yard touchdown pass on that first play of the possession. Just 4 seconds to get into the end zone. And with the extra point by Hauschka, it was 21-0. So it was all Seattle in the first half. Minnesota ended up bringing the first half to a close, but it was 21-0 Seahawks at halftime. And they didn't stop there, as they forced a 3 and out for the Vikings on their first possession of the second half. And on the Seattle Seahawks' first possession, after taking over on their own 42, they didn't waste too much time getting down into the red zone. And then they got into the end zone on a 3rd and goal from the 5. Russell Wilson hit Fred Jackson for a 5-yard touchdown pass. Hauschka added the extra point, and it was 28-0 Seahawks over the Vikings. The Vikings would continue to just punt the ball on offense after 8 plays this time. And so now the Seahawks would take over on their own 25 after the punt with about 4 minutes still left in the third. Russell Wilson drove him down the field 75 yards in just 6 plays as he ended up connecting with Doug Baldwin for a 43-yard touchdown pass. And now it was 35-0 after the extra point by Hauschka with just about a minute left in the third. And then finally the Vikings get on the scoreboard as Cordero Patterson returned the kickoff 101 yards. Blair Walsh added the extra point, and now it was 35-7. So the Seahawks would get the ball back after the kickoff, after the kick return. They would bring the third quarter to a close. They opened up the fourth quarter. They got into Minnesota territory. They got down into the red zone, but their drive stalled on the Minnesota 5 and out would come Steven Hauschka to attempt a 23-yard field goal. It was up, it was good, and it was 38-7 with 8 minutes still left to play in this game. The Vikings would then turn the ball over on downs on their next possession, and then the Seahawks went 3 and out. The Vikings would go 3 and out, and the game would come to a close with Jackson taking a couple knees as Wilson had been taken out of the game, as it was just such a beatdown, such a rout by the Seahawks as they just totally dominated the Vikings. The Seahawks really showing who the Vikings are and who the Seahawks are, as they are the defending NFC champions. They're now 7-5 on the season, 3-3 on the road, as they now get to 500 on the road in 2015. They dropped the Vikings to 8-4. They're 4-2 at home. It's just the second loss for the Vikings in Minnesota. And now with the loss, Green Bay is back on top in the NFC North due to tiebreakers, as the Vikings and Packers are both 8-4. Of course, the Seahawks helping out their push for the playoffs. Of course, the Cardinals also won today, but the Seahawks are in line for a wild card spot. They're at 7-5 if the season came to a close today. Of course, you have 4 more games left, and we'll see what happens, with the rest of the season. But Seattle, just very dominant performance on the road against a tough Vikings team that's played pretty tough at home. But here, the Seahawks just totally dominate on both sides of the ball. Their defense shutting out the Vikings. They did not allow any offensive points. The one touchdown came on that kick return by Cordero Patterson, that special teams play, the only score for the Vikings in this game. And in this game, Russell Wilson, 21 for 27, 274 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. He also had a rushing touchdown, as well as 9 carries for 51 yards on the ground. So 4 total touchdowns for Russell Wilson in this game. And Thomas Rawls, 19 carries for 101 yards and a touchdown as well. And Doug Baldwin, 5 receptions, 94 yards, 2 touchdowns. Tyler Lockett, 7 receptions for 90 yards. And for the Vikings, Teddy Bridgewater, 17-28 for 118 yards, no touchdowns, 1 interception. And the leading rusher for Minnesota, well, it was a tie between McKinnon and Peterson. Both rushed for just 18 yards. McKinnon did it on 4 carries, Peterson 8 carries. So totally getting shut down in the running game by the Seattle defense. And the leading receiver for Minnesota was Mike Wallace with 2 receptions for 43 yards. So the passing game getting shut down as well. And for the kickers, Steven Hauschka was perfect in this game. 1 for 1 on the field goals, 5 for 5 on the extra points. Blair Walsh did not attempt a field goal. He was 1 for 1 on the extra points. We look at the defense for Seattle. Frank Clark, 2 sacks. Bruce Irvin had a sack, and Michael Bennett had a sack as well. Also an interception by Earl Thomas, and Bruce Irvin had a forced fumble. And for the Vikings, Robeson had 2 sacks in this game, and Exum had a forced fumble. We look at the team stats. 25 first downs for Seattle, as they were coming at it with a very balanced attack on the ground and through the air, and just 9 first downs for the Vikings, the majority of which came through the air, so they really couldn't get anything going on the ground. And the interesting thing, 9 first downs for the Vikings. The Seahawks had 9 third down conversions, so they had 9 first downs on third down. They had 25 first downs overall, but 9 for 13 on third downs for Seattle, 69% conversion rate. Just 2 for 10 for Minnesota on third down, just 20%. And on fourth down, Seattle went for it once. They did get it 100%, and Minnesota 0 for 1 on fourth down. Total net yards, 433 for Seattle, just 125 for Minnesota. Almost 4 times as many yards for the Seahawks in this game. And on the ground, 173 net rushing yards for the Seahawks, just 31 for the Vikings. So nearly 6 times as many yards on the ground for Seattle over Minnesota. And through the air, 260 netted for the Seahawks. Russell Wilson sacked twice, losing 14 yards. And for the Vikings, they netted just 94 yards. Teddy Bridgewater sacked 4 times, losing 24 yards. We look at the penalties in this game. Both teams were penalized 9 times. 65 penalty yards for the Seahawks, 95 penalty yards for the Vikings. The Seahawks fumbled once and lost. The Vikings fumbled once, but they recovered their fumble. And then we look at the red zone. 3 for 4 for Seattle, 75%. The Vikings did not make any trips to the red zone in this game. And the time of possession, 35 minutes, 10 seconds for Seattle, 24 minutes, 50 seconds for Minnesota. So the Seahawks make a huge statement against a team that was red hot, but the Seahawks are hotter now, winning 3 straight. Is they're really making a push for the playoffs now at 7-5, and especially in this big road win against another playoff contender, as the Vikings entered this game in first place by a half a game, but now they're actually edged out by tiebreakers by the Packers. So the Packers definitely, for once, they're rooting for the Seahawks. But the Seahawks getting a huge win here. And like I said, they did it on both sides, just totally dominating up front in the trenches. And they were just running all over Minnesota, shutting down their run, putting the pressure on Bridgewater. Russell Wilson was making spectacular plays. 4 touchdowns in the game for Russell Wilson, as he had the 3 throwing plus the 1 rushing, as he was a threat with his arm and with his legs in this game. And also Thomas Rawls doing his part as well. And Doug Baldwin, another big game. After 3 touchdowns last week, now he gets 2 touchdowns this week, as he is really coming on strong here recently. Of course, he's been having a pretty good season. But the Seahawks are definitely hitting on all cylinders, especially on defense. A very dominant performance on the road. But let me know what you think in the comments section below. Definitely interested to reach your thoughts and opinions. Thank you very much for listening. It's greatly appreciated. I hope you're having a good day and are having a great weekend and enjoying all the sports.